Hello and welcome. I'm Samantha Hartley, and this is the Profitable Joyful Consulting Podcast. This season, we've been talking about consulting insights. And one of the most insightful things that ever happened to me was realizing the role that boundaries play in my business. So today, we're going to be talking about boundaries, what they are, how to recognize them, like what is going on with them. And I've selected one of my spiritual teachers to participate with me in this conversation. Emily Baldwin is the co-owner of Pachasia, a healing private practice specializing in shamanic facilitation, meditation guidance, somatic experiencing, and therapeutic yoga. She's also the co-owner of Sedona Payments, a digital payments and business consulting agency specializing in merchant services. And she is with me today from Sedona, Arizona, which I hear is a magical place with wonderful energies. So welcome, Emily.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Me too. Hello. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say hello to all your listeners. We're both really excited and have been talking about, what we're going to have in store for you today. So I just wanted to say hi.
Hi. Hi. And okay, so boundaries, am I right? Boundaries are the kind of thing that I feel like are probably not a problem until they're a problem. So can you tell us a little how you have worked with boundaries? How did you discover them as a thing? And then I have a lot more questions for you about them.
Yeah, absolutely. So boundaries are not an issue until they are. And just a little anecdote, this basically the start of my work with boundaries was during my shamanic facilitation apprenticeship, basically. And I was training with a mentor and really just poured my heart and soul into this work. And so much so that for the first 2 winters of my training, I got a cold every single month. And, after your 5th cold of the winter, my mentor sat me down and said, girl, your body is trying to say something. Your body is trying to talk to you. And it is really important that you listen while it's just a cold. And we're just at that level because it will just get louder and louder. And so I didn't understand why I was getting sick so often, what was going on. And so I sat with it and really, got quiet, grounded, asked my body what was going on. And it was that I was very permeable energetically. And I didn't have great boundaries. I didn't have great boundaries with time, my physical body, my own personal boundaries of taking care of myself and my energy management in order to be able to serve people in a healing setting, which is very metabolically taxing on the body. It can be. And it was the beginning of a really, really important chapter, just a foundational chapter. And really for this podcast and the scope of what we're going to talk about today, it's really just foundation. Because this could be a whole podcast series in and of itself, and we would still just scratch the surface, basically. So I got to see all of these different ways that I didn't have solid boundaries externally with other people, with clients, with friends, with mentors, and most importantly, internally with myself. And so that began a wonderful, lifelong journey. One thing to keep in mind when you're talking about boundaries, especially at this foundational level, is it's important to understand that this is a daily practice. This is something and it's a lifelong practice. So this is something that I'm going to be working on in different layers and different levels for the rest of my life. And so as you start out really thinking about this, be forewarned, when you start thinking about this and, listening to this podcast is going to be a really great catalyst for a lot of your listeners. Boundaries are going to come up.
Yeah.
And as you start to learn about it, the universe is like, all right, let's test it. No boundaries. How are you going to handle it?
So how did you address that? How did you do something so that you didn't get a cold every time?
So for that particular, time in my life, I understood that my self-care needed to go from here to here. I started paying attention to what I was putting in my body, what I was, my internal boundaries with, was I going and getting enough sleep before a training weekend? Was I eating healthy, nourishing, energy producing foods? Or was I going into kind of that comfort zone of comfort food that's actually not really great for your body? These little practices that I put into place. Also, within my own self, and listeners, you can do it with me. You basically just come back to your own breath, come back to your own body, having an awareness that's 50% in and 50% out, and living from that place. And whenever I'm out too much out over here with my awareness, presence, energy, whatever you want to call it, oh, I'm doing it again. And then just coming back again. It's a practice. So the first part of this process is just awareness. What's out of balance, what's in balance. Whatever's in balance, you want to feed that. Whatever's out of balance, you want to either rein it in, shift it, change it, try and go underneath it to see what the values are underneath it. Am I valuing other people's time or space or energy or needs more than my own? Asking yourself those kinds of questions. So it wasn't just a one thing. And a lot of this work, the shamanic facilitation, the meditation guidance, the energy work that we do, just the healing work in general, it's not one thing that's going to fix it. It's 10 different practices that you put into place. And maybe today these 4 aren't that strong, so tomorrow you do better. But like, as much as you can, being patient with yourself as you're going through this process, because it takes time.
Yeah. Yeah. As you told that, I was reminded of this thing that I went to years ago. There was a conference in New York, and I traveled there from, I can't remember if I was in Arkansas or Atlanta, but a very non-New York place. And I went to it, and I realized that I was attending an event where I was seen as the competitor. And I was going in all kind of like happy-go-lucky open. And I walked through the aisles, and I would go into people's booths, and they would look at me with daggers in their eyes. They would come over and almost throw me out. And I was like, that's weird. That's weird. That's weird. And at the end of it, the end of that day, I got the worst flu and was bedridden the entire rest of the trip. And it was I think the left brain explanation would have been wow, you probably picked up a bug when you were there, but I knew I had been slimed energetically. And it's reminding me of what you're talking about. And I feel like it's very easy for people to say, well, I'm not in those kind of, shamanic or meditative environments, or when I go into a healing environment, I'm very different. I'm no, this was a business event I walked into, and I got slimed. And I think other people will recognize the experience of being vampired when you just have that client who just sucks all your energy out of you, and you're dag, I don't understand what's really going on, but every time I leave a meeting with them, I don't have any energy anymore. So something's really going on, and those are, I guess we would call these energetic boundary violations. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And know that we're not harping on energy vampires. They honestly, they usually have no idea that they're doing it, but we all know them. Yeah. Clients where you get off the phone and you're just oh my God, I need a nap. That kind of a situation. And also the other thing that you said that kind of triggered a thought for me was I was really open. So when you were going down to those booths, when your energy is open, here's another thing that your listeners could probably benefit from. Play with how open or closed you are energetically. Sometimes when I'm in in my previous life, we were in the art world. So when you go into an art fair, or when you go into a business fair, or you go into a big situation where, there are lots of potential clients or a lot of potential competitors, et cetera, just, fill in the blank. It can be anything. Play with how open and closed you are. And things that can help with that is posture, your costume, whatever clothing you're wearing. Oftentimes, if I don't want to deal with people, I'll put on very muted clothing, not bright colors, not standing out, that kind of a thing. And it sounds incredibly woo-woo, but if you try it and play with it, you'll be oh, wow, this actually works.
Yeah.
Kind of putting an invisibility cloak on those times when you want to be a little bit more closed off. And then in those other times when you want to be open, play with it, with the costume, what we wear and how we hold ourselves. People respond to that. It's the energy and the vibration that we're putting out into the world. And so the universe and the people around us are going to react accordingly.
Definitely. Well, I've always put on I got guidance to do this one time, to put on a hazmat suit. And I actually, before I go into that kind of a setting now, I will put on my hazmat suit, and I totally do the pantomime for it. Like, I step into these big boots. It's like like a spacesuit that they would wear. And I put my arms into the thing and I put it up, and I put the helmet on, and then I zip the whole thing up. And I think that what's happening during that is subconsciously I'm activating those protective systems that are sending out the message, right? So that's a way to guard our boundaries. But we kind of skipped ahead. Can we go back and look at, like, what are the types of boundaries that we have? Because we're spending a lot of time on energetic ones, but there's many kinds of boundaries, right?
And literally, like, we could have several podcasts just going in a deep dive for each type. Couple things. Boundaries can be, all right, little foundation. It's important to kind of ask yourself how you view boundaries. It's important to, for me in the past, it was like, in my childlike way of viewing this, I'm in trouble because I did something bad. Or there was some shame around boundaries or going into it, or there was some resistance that would come up when anybody would talk about it. So it's important to kind of ask yourself, where are you with that subject to start? Now I understand that boundaries are here to help us, like, trust ourselves, are here to help us function in whatever we have to do in this world and whatever we're creating in this world. And they help us stay safe, create safety for us and for the people around us, so that we all know what page everybody's on. Now, specific types of boundaries, remember that boundaries can be too close. So a physical boundary, too close would be someone touching me and I don't want them to touch me. I have the right to, say no, or to be touched by only the people I say and only the way I want to be touched. Another interesting one for all of us that have, been on Zoom for the last 2 years straight.
Yeah.
Notice the difference between my energy right now and my energy like this. And so be aware and modulate. There's not a lot of awareness around that. And everybody I know, there's like a bunch of people going, I know that person that I'm always in the with, and they're all up on their camera. And it's a physical boundary.
Lean out. It's funny that it's a physical boundary in a virtual environment.
Totally.
But
that's another thing around physical boundaries is, like, COVID. Think about with that 6 foot, radius of social or physical distancing. COVID has really changed our physical boundaries and what we're comfortable with. And so one of the things I noticed was, especially when it was last year, I was living in New York City, it was a scary time. My animal instincts, my sympathetic fight or flight nervous system got triggered when somebody would get too close. And so my boundaries changed during that time. Now I find that I'm a little bit more comfortable. I'm way more comfortable with people being in my space. Another thing to think about with physical boundaries is, your auric field, your personal space. Is someone kind of invading that? And if so, you have the right to kind of step back and be in control of whoever's in your personal space. So those are some ways to think about, like, physical boundaries. Emotional boundaries, how you're spoken to, how you're treated. If someone is being kind to you, how someone speaks to you, anything that would trigger an emotional reaction. Or boundaries can be too close. Boundaries can be too far away. So someone who grew up with an emotionally unavailable parent, those emotional boundaries were too far away. There wasn't enough intimacy in a relationship where it's appropriate to have a lot of intimacy. Intimacy is another, and the appropriate level of intimacy is another aspect of emotional boundaries. That's or somebody that's, like, really invasive and asking me questions about stuff that I'm not comfortable talking about. That would be a boundary that's too close. These are there are so many different dimensions of it, but that's another way to think about, like, emotional boundaries. Just checking my notes to see. Oh, energetics. I mean, we've already touched a little bit about it, but it's honestly one of the things that I think is so, so important for your viewership and your listeners. And you'll notice there's something happening. I mean, there's definitely a lot happening, but there seems to be this kind of, and add whatever language you want around it, whatever you're comfortable with, but like awakening, ascension, embodiment, grounding, up leveling, upgrading, whatever you want to call it, something's happening. And
things feel different now, right?
Exactly. Like things are happening on the collective, but they're also happening individually.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that there are a lot of people listening right now that, you're going through some kind of an upgrade or awakening or some big process like that. And as you go through those processes, your energy management and your energetic boundaries will have to level up with you. I know that I'm personally going through that and trying to kind of up level what resources I'm using. And one good practice with this path, start out with like an inner circle. Have like your, the people that have your back, that are you're okay showing your deep dark underbelly to. Those are the people that you practice with first. And people that'll really hold space for you as you're practicing this new level of boundaries. That's also a really important key. But energy.
How would we practice with them? What specifically could I practice with my inner circle?
Oh, man. Okay, so right after the second winter with all the colds, I went to, and at that time, my inner circle were my male colleagues and my husband. And somehow I felt a lot more comfortable in that moment, having uncomfortable conversations, setting boundaries, having conflict potentially with men than I did with women. So I chose them because I felt really, really safe. And I said, hey guys, I'm working on my boundaries and I don't know what I'm doing, but I feel really safe with you. So can you guys hold space for me while I figure this out? And all of them were like, we got you. Absolutely. So then what I would do is if I was in a situation where I had to ask them to do something, or I had to put a boundary up, or I had to take care of myself in some way, I would first do it with them. And here's another thing to keep in mind. When you start to practice these, if you're anything like me and the vast majority of, especially women, because we turn this shit off when very, very early, when we're young, it's gonna come out at the same maturity level as whenever we shut it down.
Yeah.
So when I started practicing again, it was not grown ass 36-year-old, embodied woman.
Yeah.
It was like 7-year-old.
Right.
And it wasn't pretty. That's why I say, like, go with your inner circle first. Go with the people.
Yeah.
You can overstep or, go too far or make a mistake, and they still love you. They still support you. And you can easily or smoothly smooth out any wrinkles that happened during the process.
Sure.
That was how I did it, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. I mean, I can imagine saying kind of like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to participate in that. Don't ask me to do that, or don't touch me, or, leave me alone, or I don't want to come in at that time. Like all of those kinds of boundary assertions. I mean, it reminds me of a lot of times when people are in their first year of therapy, they get a lot of awareness, and then they're kind of angry about things. And then when they go to set those boundaries, they do sometimes kind of sound, as you're saying, like what? And in general, when I think for a lot of people, when they're asserting boundaries, and because they've come into awareness that they've been violated, they sometimes are kind of either awkward or maybe harsh, or it's just that everybody's always like, oh, come on, you always go along with everything. And then you're like, no, and I mean no, and they're like shocked and surprised because it's a brand new day for them. So I think that can be one of the downsides of the first time that you start to get serious about your boundaries, is that other people may not take you seriously at first, or it might hurt their feelings, or there's some kind of a little bit of the awkwardness of doing that for the first few times.
Totally, and that's such a good point. When you start to practice boundaries, you will probably trigger big time the people who have none, and
Oh,
or people that are used to you not having any. And it's a part of the game. And that's why it's good to practice with like the people that you really trust first, because then, you know, kind of that next level is the people that you just need to, because they're usually the biggest offenders of boundary violations in your life. And, you know, with any kind of therapeutic or professional relationship, or, you know, our most intimate ones, you actually can achieve a lot more intimacy in the rupture and repair way of doing this. You know, like there are going to be ruptures along the way as you're practicing this. The important thing is to repair afterwards.
mm-hmm.
And to be honest, you know, hey, I'm practicing this. You know, I think I was a little too harsh there, or sticking to your guns and it's pissed somebody off, and that's okay. You know, sitting with that was a really hard part for me, because I was, you know, little miss people pleaser when I started this process. So having somebody triggered or mad at me or, you know, upset with me for putting up a boundary was really, really hard for me to sit with, and absolutely necessary. And I'm glad that I sat with the discomfort, because it was necessary for me to choose me first, and for me to be able to create the things that I want to create. I have to have solid boundaries.
Well, I think the reason that I want to talk to you about this today is because when women consultants come into business, a lot of times that if you can get away with lax boundaries in your personal life, but once you get into business, you can't, and it's going to be a mess. And so a lot of the women that I work with like realize like, oh my God, like I've never had to, everybody's just understood. Like I didn't have to make an overt agreement about what boundaries are. And I didn't have to defend or assert or, you know, so you just have to be so much more formal about boundaries in a business situation. And here's the real thing is like, maybe you don't until like a certain revenue level. And then when you're like, you can't make it to 2 million with no boundaries. So there's plenty of women who've made it to like, I made it to 150. And I just worked with people who either got it or I didn't have to do it. But I have a lot of women who are in the 150,000 to let's say $500,000 range. And what is coming straight at them is like, every single day I've got to do the boundary thing, like with team members who are trying to get away with things, or clients, or myself. So I want to talk about self boundaries a little later, but how about like business where everything is like all boundaries all the time?
Totally. Well, think about it. How many of us work with a contract with clients? The contract is literally, what are the boundaries of this relationship? What's not? And when there's conflict later on, as I have learned from, you know, people in my life that have had major lawsuits and issues professionally, you know, what's in the contract is what matters. What's written is the solid boundary that matters. And so, you know, our work starts with contracts. Our work starts with boundaries, especially in the healing arts, especially in the business world.
Yeah.
You know, you can't escape that. Absolutely.
It's so interesting you say contracts, because so often one of the things that I've done has been to have women, especially again, like be incredibly diligent about money things. That's going to be writing down all agreements, doing an agreement, whether you choose to have lawyers involved with that or not, you can just write out a very specific agreement. And also why things like barter can get like too squishy. People are like, well, I'm just referring business to them and they're referring business to me, so we don't really need to do it. I'm like, no. So everything that can be in even the least formal, like a back of a napkin agreement, is still what I love that you brought that up. That's an externalized boundary. And it's a more overt agreement than just like, hey, we got it, right? You know what I mean? Yeah, you know. So all of these assumptions put us into Dangerville. And it is, especially when you're getting along, it's so much easier to say, hey, here are the terms of our agreement. Here's how I want to work. And here's when you'll contact me. And when I contact you, this will happen. So for example, like, I work from 10 in the morning until 4 p.m. I return emails within 24 hours, like, you know, just those kind of laying out those kind of boundaries overtly as opposed to like assumptively.
Yep. Well, and that's such a really smart thing to do, because let me tell you, man, one thing that I've realized in my work is that assuming that someone's on the same page as you is usually a recipe for disaster. And it's so simple to just say it, to start. Things don't become as big of an issue because then you can just come back to, nope, we discussed this and this is how I work. And then, there are always going to be exceptions, like, and I'm just thinking about the moms in the audience.
Mm-hmm.
Your kid needs to eat, even if you don't feel like it, even if, like you're tired. There are just things that you have to do. And yet there are definitely ways that you can build things into your relationship with your family, your relationships with your clients, with your coworkers, with the people that work for you, that, actually make it possible for you to really be there and serve your clients in the way that you're purposed to.
Yes, for sure.
And then you mentioned time. Like, time is another huge boundary type category. And like you, like, unless it's like an absolute emergency, and if it's a true emergency, call 911.
Yeah.
But I don't answer things after 9 p.m.
Yeah.
Planning into and understanding your own cycles. When are you most productive? When are you least productive? I have a client who literally, he works with the moon cycles. So he knows that, he can go, super, go at it from new moon to full moon. The days around the full moon, things are usually pretty chaotic with him energetically. And so he knows not to make any major decisions, have any major client meetings around the full moon. He understands his cycle. Sometimes it's just your cycle throughout the day. But then also, I am not available during these times, and then don't be available. And then, if it's a really important client and we're really it's really important that they're very high touch, and it's, I need to be very present for them, or we're in the middle of an important process, I might reach out and just say, hey, I can't respond today, but I will get back to you by this time. And that there's an accountability there as well. And you're still, being there for your client, or, fill in the blank, whoever it is, but you're also honoring your own time. Yeah. And I just saw this, somebody posted this on Instagram, and I thought it was brilliant. Availability and free time are not the same thing.
Oh, how fun. I think they're quoting me. I literally wrote that down the other day because I love it too. I love it too. What I was referring to is that feeling when you look at your calendar, when somebody says, hey, can you, I'd like to have a meeting. Can you do so-and-so? And I would look at my calendar. That my first reaction would be to see if I was available. And then I was like, hold on, do I want to do this? Is this the thing that that is necessary at all? And I think that's a really important distinction to make. Just because you're available doesn't mean you need to do it. So let's do another kind of specific example of this, because so I have had this happen with more than one client, but I'll just stick with one. So I have a client, Beth. She had a client who was pushing the scope of the work with her, asked her to do something that was clearly outside the scope. And when she's,
Scope creep, I know it well.
Yes. So she said, actually, that's outside the scope. And then he was cranky, and then she got cranky. So she came to me, and she's super mad about this boundary violation and is asking for advice. And I'm the first thing to do is don't communicate when you're super mad. And a lot of my clients, when their client does a boundary violation, and this also happens with team, they are inflamed. Yep. So what's up with that?
So first, whenever you're triggered, if it's really big, it's probably not about the thing in front of you. And it's just good to know that. So, a couple things. Totally agree with the idea of do not communicate when you are charged. This kind of comes into the personal boundaries and sort of energy management and personal responsibility, which are all, in lockstep with boundaries and that conversation. So first thing to do is to handle your charge. I am responsible for my health, my happiness, my charge when I'm angry. That's my responsibility. And yes, you can, go and blast this person the way they deserve. Truthfully, I don't recommend that. Right. It doesn't work. It doesn't help. It doesn't further the relationship. And oftentimes we are responding from a much younger place, a time when, an original boundary violation where, our time, space, something about us was not respected, or some boundary of ours was violated. And so again, a lot of that charge, check in with yourself to see, how old is this? And then do some work around that. You can talk with your therapist, someone like me, somebody that kind of is trained in that work to help you go down that rabbit hole to figure out what that original boundary violation was, maybe why you're so charged in this moment.
So why am I so mad about this is kind of the question to ask.
Yeah.
And does this remind me of another time? Is that how that might go?
Yeah. When is the first time? A really good question is, when is the first time I remember feeling this way? And check in with your body. Try and identify and get into that feeling part of your body instead of the thinking part, because the body's a lot more intelligent than the brain. And so getting into the body, really being present with the anger. How am I experiencing that? Elevated heart rate, elevated respiratory rate. Do I feel heat anywhere? Do I feel energy moving, tingling, vibration, lots of different ways that anger can show up in the body. Where am I feeling it? Can I feel the boundaries of that place? So getting into the physical part of it's really important. And then, sometimes you just got to take care of your charge. And that's go for a walk, go for a run. If you don't have that available, being in a place that's relatively soundproof helps. A lot of us are working from home. So if I need to deal with a lot of charge real quick, I literally, and this is all thanks to the brilliant Mama Gina, taught me how to swamp. And that is literally give yourself permission, go in your bedroom, get on your bed, go full 2-year-old temper
tantrum. Yeah.
Hit the mattress, hit the pillows, scream into the pillows, kick the mattress, something where you're not hurting anybody else. What that's doing is it's taking care of your charge vertically. It's with you, and you're not doing it horizontally at someone.
On all your loved ones who are in the path of destruction.
Yeah. Or the client that, the thing originated with this person. So what that's doing is you're taking care of your charge. There's going to be, by going through this process of asking yourself, feeling into what's coming up sensation wise and in the body, and then taking care of your charge and letting your body actually move that anger through, you're going to be able to, first off, just get a lot of information. Oh yeah, this actually feels like that time when I was a kid and I said something and, my parent didn't respect what I was saying, or I wasn't seen, or I wasn't heard, or I wasn't respected. And then you can go back to that version of you and give that part of you what you need. And that's the original, boundary violation. And that's the thing that's kind of stuck in the body. So dealing with the original thing is actually going to help not kind of attract that pattern over and over and over again into your life. That you'll get lots of information. And because you're handling your charge vertically, you can come back after appropriate amount of, time and processing to the person that did the boundary violation in this time. And you can come to them without the charge that might literally just add unnecessary energy to the container between you and won't actually be productive. So you can kind of, come a little bit cleaner into the interaction, maintain the boundary, have a real understanding and be there for yourself and have your own back in that moment, and not dump all of your stuff from when you were a kid onto this unsuspecting person who, probably doesn't deserve all that charge.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And I want to point out 2 really cool things that you said. I love not taking it out on them because, just from a business point of view, from a communication standpoint, honestly, when I heard the things, I was like, well, I don't think that's a big deal. And they were like, I'm so angry. I'm like, really? Because I can't, so I didn't, an objective third party who didn't have that baggage or didn't have that relationship might not necessarily feel it. I'm not saying they were wrong to feel it. I'm just saying that I didn't respond that way to those particular violations. So having more of a neutral assertion or reconfirmation of the boundary, I think is really clear. And I love, love, love that you said that you don't need to attract that anymore. Very often when people tell me, well, this keeps happening to me, here's a big one. People are always contacting me and asking me to do something for free for them. And I always say, like, nobody ever does that to me. Or if they're like, people are always constantly like, can I pick your brain? And I'm like, nobody ever asks to pick my brain. Now, maybe I just seem completely mean and unapproachable, but I think the thing is, that's not an issue I need to work on resolving anymore, because I'm done with that, at least at this level. We'll see what the future holds. So if what is really meaningful to me is that it's really worth doing the temper tantrum. It's really worth doing the work on this stuff, because then you don't need to keep working on it. And I think that's a really good promise to make to listeners, that invest in the work of like reworking through your boundary issues, because then you don't have to do that anymore, and your business will be different after that.
Absolutely.
Super, super great. Okay. So you have an exercise that I would love for us to do together. Can you lead us through that?
Sure.
Awesome.
So basically, this is something I like to do kind of at the end of a client session, if that's energy management or energy healing, somatic experiencing, guided meditation, anything. Basically, it's a way to kind of come back into the body. Mm-hmm. And to feel one of the most important boundaries that we have, which is the boundary of our skin. So this particular boundary, like any other delineation between, one thing and another, where one thing stops and another begins. The skin is our largest organ, and just a really simple grounding and sort of embodiment boundary exercise. Sort of this is like our 1.0. Would be just to, lay hands on yourself. And, when I do this, I just put like a little light pressure. I try and feel my body from my hands perspective and my hands from my body's perspective. So take your time with this. And then, just starting near the top. One really nice one is back here, the back of the skull. And just kind of sitting there with yourself, holding yourself. It's just this really nice supportive posture. And the back of the neck is actually the first place outside of the womb that we learned trust, because this is where we had to be held because we couldn't hold our necks up. So it's a really important, as you're building your boundary practice, there's a trust part of it too, a trust with yourself. And so this is a really good one. Just lightly pressing on the skin, feeling where you stop and the world begins, and just, lightly pressing all the way down and feeling, maybe when you get down to your thighs, feeling the chair underneath you, holding you, supporting you up, feeling it against the back of your thighs and your backside, and then, coming down to the knees, and then I go all the way down to the feet. And so just feeling, just feeling my body, feeling where I stop and the world begins. And boundary is the first part of that work. Really, it's not the external. It's not dealing with other people. Boundaries 101 is, what do I feel like? What does my energy feel like? What does my body feel like? What does my personal space feel like? Because you have to know what you feel like in order to know what others feel like and to know the difference.
Mm-hmm. What is me? What is not me?
Yeah. And any of my empaths in the audience, you know what I'm talking about. There were no boundaries because you could feel everything anybody around you was feeling.
It can be very confusing to know what is not me as an empath. Yes.
Absolutely. And then, I would also recommend just like, go onto YouTube. There's so many free guided meditations, like a chakra meditation, where you just feel the energy of each chakra. Descending would be best, but ascending's fine. But yeah, like that's sort of like the 2.0, like starting to really feel your energy, your life force. That's going to help you, it'll snowball from there. But just like awareness is the first part of any kind of healing or transformational journey.
Yes. And I think this, like the physical boundaries of myself are the beginning of us bringing at least that and then more into our own awareness. So Emily, you've talked about several of the ways that you work with people. So what's a good way in or a place for them to learn more about how to work with you?
Absolutely. So my company, either one. I have two companies. I have Pachasia, which is the healing practice, private practice. You can go to pachasia.com, or on Instagram, we're at Pachasia. My email for that is emily@pachasia.com. Feel free to email me. And then for Sedona Payments, go to sedonapayments.com, emily@sedonapayments.com. Both of those are really great ways to get in touch with me. Yeah.
Fabulous. Well, having done, I've done guided spiritual meditation with Emily, and we've done, Christopher, whom you know from the show, has done somatic experiencing and a lot of work on this boundary stuff and trauma release and all kinds of amazing things that you do. So I encourage everyone to reach out. And of course, all your information will be in the show notes. You did want to mention a couple of books for us.
Absolutely. So as you're starting this journey, there are 3 books in particular that have been really great resources for me. One is called Boundaries Boss. And if you just look it up, it's a wonderful woman. It's geared towards women, but to be honest, the information in there is so good that, like, don't worry about the pronouns. It's for men too. It's brilliant. Another one is called Better Boundaries. And the third is just Boundaries. It's by Anne Catherine, and it's a really short read. So if you want to kind of start with an easy, foray into this work, that's where I'd start. But all 3 of those books they come at it from slightly different perspectives, but are really, really great resources just to help you conceptualize, because there's so many dimensions to this. There's so many aspects to it, and things that kind of come along with it: consent, codependency, personal responsibility, all that, like energy management, all that good stuff. So yeah, it's exciting. It's incredibly rewarding. Get ready to get out of your comfort zone, because it's not comfortable at all.
It is, once you have really good boundaries, though. So the work does pay off.
Life gets a lot more simple. There's a lot more self-trust. There's a lot, things in your life will run way more smoothly when your boundaries up level. And you'll find that throughout life, as you upgrade, your boundaries will need to upgrade too. So this is a lifelong practice.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Emily. It was great to talk with you about this. I know we're going to be visiting this topic again in future episodes, because it's big. And I love that we talked about awareness of it today. And I really appreciate you bringing your unique insights and your unique point of view to us. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was a blast. I had fun.
Thanks for watching. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell to get video updates. Thanks.